Okay, you ready to rumble?
I am. Is it
All right.
recording now?
Yes, it is. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're back.
And we're back. Again.
Back for another episode.
Yeah. So
this one will be titled something along the lines of "What's in my bag?"
Yeah, or what's
in that bag?
What's in that bag? What's in my plug bag? More specifically, is probably what will be titled. And yeah. So
why don't we just crack right into it?
I guess we should.
Let's talk about the bag first.
Yeah. Okay. So I use an ODM.
Remember, you're gonna have to bring it a little bit on screen, a little farther on screen.
Yes.
So
All right. So
see it.
I use an ODM plug bag. It's all like open now because I have a bunch of plugs in it, so I can kind of show off what I'm using. But I use an ODM plug bag. This plug bag is the 3.5 tube ODM plug bag. It's a great bag because it's very, very durable. It also has an extra.
Because you're going to be showing a lot of things. I'm just gonna tweak this just slightly for the folks
sure.
at home. Let's see if we can just tweak this a little bit.
Yeah, just turning it slightly. Hopefully this doesn't screw us up right now.
We'll
turn it back in a second.
Yeah,
right.
Just get you a little bit frame.
So this is the plug bag. So it also has a little thing, well, it's more of like a bucktail outer pocket that you can unclip from it, and it's attached to the bag. This is gonna be horrible on the audio. So it has. Anyway, so it has like a little extra bag on the front of it, and I haven't unclipped this entire year. There's an absolute monster scale in here, like that was in between my bag.
Bring that closer so they can see it.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
For those who are listening to who are watching the podcast on YouTube,
who knows what bass that was from?
Monster scale.
But that's a monster scale. That's probably from one of the 30, 40 pounders.
Yeah.
That's a huge scale. But so I have so that's that. That's like a bucktail outer pocket, which is I think awesome because it's its own little thing. You can detach it and attach it to your surf belt if that's all you're using that day.
You're just going light.
Yeah, exactly. So you can throw that in. I also put like leaders and stuff into it, which is great, and I'll get into that in a second. So it has an extra tube on the side of it, and on that extra tube, I'd go the other way because it's kind of different on the camera. So it has an extra tube on this side. Am I doing this right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
This side?
Yeah,
okay.
there you go.
It has an extra tube on this side, and I generally keep my smaller plugs in that tube. And then there's a pocket on the other side.
And for those who are listening, this podcast is probably you'll get the most value if you go to YouTube and watch it.
Yeah.
But you'll still get some value.
Yeah,
listening
exactly.
To the audio
And
version. But if you really want to see what all this stuff looks like, you should just watch the clips of it on YouTube.
Yes. But you should, because I'll go more in depth of why I use different colors and what plugs are in there.
Yeah.
But for those of you that don't know what bag I'm talking about, you can go and look at it on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you should get a pretty good idea of what I'm saying. So it's a great plug bag because it has two extra side pockets, one that has a tube and one that doesn't. I guess you could also buy another tube for the other pocket if you wanted another tube. So generally I'll put smaller stuff in the outer pocket, and I'll even put rig deals in the outer pocket too. Because that's like where I'll store my rig deals and stuff.
And they don't smell.
And they don't.
Pocket too bad.
Yeah, they're not too bad. And then on this clip side here, I generally keep plastic bags filled with leaders, which probably haven't been used all season. But there's leaders in a bag that I have in the side. So that's a leader. It's probably full of water. And we can just keep going. More leaders. Some rusty hooks.
Oh, yeah.
Some very rusty hooks, probably from eeling. See, I haven't dug into this in a long time. More leaders. Yeah, I should.
Why do you keep them in plastic bags?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't gone through this all season. Some of this stuff is probably from legitimately the beginning of the season. More leaders.
And they're just in Ziploc bags.
They're just in Ziploc bags. I have like 3 per thing.
Yeah.
They're in just little Ziploc bags. More leaders. even more leaders.
And that's just in case you break something while you're out there?
Exactly. So, generally I won't run out of leaders because I have 100 of them in my bag. More hooks and leaders. And these are 80-pound leaders. It says 80-pound. So, that's the other thing about... the other good thing about that is... Oh, wow, look at this. More clips. These are clips that are horrible, but I love them. And everybody gives me so much crap about them.
What are they?
They're just tsunami tactical angler clips. Mm-hmm. And everybody always gives me so much crap about them.
Why do they give you...
Oh, because they bend out super easy, and I've almost lost so many fish due to them, but I haven't.
Why do you use them, though?
Because there's no good reason why I use them, but the reason I have been using them is because they're pretty easy to, like, hook onto the rod, the eye stem of your rod. Yeah. If you're watching on the video podcast, so when I'm, like, policing my line up, I like to clip it to the stem of my eye on my rod, and it's easier to do it than a tactical angler's clip. I actually do have a tactical angler's clip on it right now, and that is what I would say is the preferred thing. So don't be like me and use the other ones, but I kind of like them, and I have caught big fish using them, but I've also had them bend out a significant amount. I haven't lost a fish due to it, but I would not suggest using them. Okay. So I have a bunch of leaders in my bag, both with pre-tied hooks on them as well as with clips on them. So the reason I have pre-tied clips on them, or the reason I have hooks as well as pre-tied clips, is because I want the ability to switch back and forth between using eels and using lures. We could also move this back now.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I'll just scooch it back a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
This is we're just doing this sort of live for the video podcast.
Yeah.
We're just scooching the camera back and forth.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Okay, perfect. So now we're gonna go into the great part about this bag is it's hard for the hooks to get stuck into the bag. So I used to use a Shimano surf bag, and the hooks would get stuck in it, and they don't. Mm-hmm. Although I do like how you can organize this stuff a little bit better in those, and the hooks don't get caught in each other as much. But I don't know, you can fit more stuff in this bag, and I like fitting more stuff in it. Yeah. So the other great thing is it has two flaps. It has one main flap that goes over all the tubes, and then there's two horizontal flaps that lock in everything that's in the tubes. So if you do get hit by a wave when you're fishing, your stuff doesn't come flying out. Also, on either side of the plug bag, on the inside, by the side of the tubes, there are little sleeves, which you can put leaders and stuff in them, as well as bigger plugs that don't quite fit in the bag. So right now, I have a yellow Danny plug. This is a Pumbaa plug, Danny plug. And I really like Danny plugs because they're giant. And I have another one in bunker here, which is my favorite color for it. And the reason I really, really like Danny plugs is because they catch ginormous fish. They just do, because they have this slow, wobble motion on the surface, and the bass just can't handle it, and and especially big bass will hit it. Even when they're being pretty finicky, they'll still generally hit a Danny plug. And it's great. It's really great when there's a lot of large bait around. So if you're fishing where there's a lot of big mackerel, or they're feeding on bunker, and they will generally hit the Danny plug, and I'll fish them at night as well as during the day. I've had just as much luck on them at night as I have had during the day. I like to fish them generally like a topwater plug would be thrown in the early morning or evening, because I just think that's when you should be fishing during the day anyway, but it also seems to be more productive using these plugs in general. The great part about the Pumbaa plug plugs is there's great hardware on the plugs. So on this Danny plug right now, I believe there's 5x strong VMC hooks on here. So you hook big. I mean, this is a large profile bait. You're going to be hooking big fish, and you don't want your hooks to get bent out, especially if you're fishing with a lot of pressure and you are in deep cover, especially, or deep cover is in like there's a lot of boulders around, which is where I like to fish these plugs. Is I like to fish them in boulder fields, because especially shallow boulder fields, when you can't really fish a diving plug, but you want to fish something that maybe is just under the surface or on the surface. Generally, these are on the surface, but you can tweak the eye of the plug to up or down. So if you move the eye down, the plug's going to go up, and if you move the eye up, it's going to go down. In the water. So that's like the thing. So if you want to adjust it for where you're fishing, if you're fishing shallow and you want it on the surface, it will be on the surface. These plugs will swim on the surface, and they're absolutely fantastic for catching very large fish. So I generally will hold a couple of these bigger plugs, like the Danny plug or the swim or the jointed swimmers, in that where you put those larger profile plugs that don't really fit in the tubes. That's where I'll be storing those.
You want to just mention quickly, I know we talked about it in a previous podcast, I think on the first podcast, but because you're going to talk about them a lot.
Yeah,
you want to talk about your relationship with Pumbaa plugs?
Yeah, so I'm one of the pro staff members for Pumbaa plugs. So I believe in their plugs completely, because I've caught so many large fish on their plugs, and honestly, I've caught more big fish on their plugs in general, because they have some incredible plugs that are unlike the Gibbs and the Guppies and of that, because they're also incredibly environmentally friendly plugs, and they also have really good hardware, which a lot of the other companies don't do, is put good hardware on their plugs. And I think that their plugs are very, very well built for hooking and landing large fish in general.
And if you want to get like a closer look at the plugs,
yes,
here's their website, PumbaaPlugs.com, if you want to follow along while we're talking. Anyway,
they have a lot of great stuff on there.
Yeah.
So I throw a lot of Danny plugs. I guess I will just tell you where I throw them. I will throw them on a sandy beach. I'll also throw them, in estuaries, especially like in the fall when there's a lot of bunker getting pushed in there. It's again great. They're not super good in current. They'll handle a little bit of light current, but they don't handle very heavy current super well. As well as they don't really handle super choppy conditions well, but I love to throw them when it's big, when there's big waves out as well, because they catch giant fish and they have that big profile, and the bass love big waves. And it's just how when I target, I try to target throwing stuff that mimics the bait as well as I can, and if I can get away with throwing a Danny plug, I'm going to throw a Danny plug 9 out of 10 times. So that is a great plug that I have in here. Now we're going to go into the bag a little bit more. I want to go, I guess I'll start with daytime stuff. So I fish during the day. Contrary to popular belief, I do fish during the day. And I don't do it a lot, but when I do it either early in the morning or like just during the evening, like into dark when I would normally fish. So what plugs do I throw in the spring, especially to target those, mid to high 30-inch bass that come in around May for where we are, or around May is in May, the bass show up, they're pretty small, maybe you can get like a keeper if you're lucky, and then around late May, early June is when you can get bass up to 30, 40 pounds for around here. But if you want to target those bass early in the season, an incredible plug for that is the Magnum Walker. I love this plug. This is probably not if my favorite plug that Pumbaa makes, because these are unlike any other walk the dog type style plugs out there, because in my experience with a lot of the different custom plugs and a lot of different plug companies, is they dive under the water when you're trying to work them, which is awful when you see this big fish swirling behind your plug and you try to speed it up and have it walk a little bit faster on the surface, and then it dives under the water and the bass gets a good look at it and it doesn't hit it. So this plug has a special shaped nose on it that is cut at an angle. If you're looking at it on the video podcast, you'll be able to see that. So it's cut at an angle to keep it up on the surface of the water. And it has incredibly wide, like back and forth walk the dog action, almost up to 4 feet. You can get it to walk back and forth about 4 feet, and you walk it super slowly across the surface. You can walk it fast and zigzag it really quickly. And for the early season, pretty finicky fish, this seems to really get them going, especially if they're not hitting pencil poppers. This will be one of the first things out of my bag, because when it's a bright, clear water day and you're throwing a pencil and they're just swirling behind the pencil and they're not hitting it, sometimes they want that slower, like lackadaisical side-to-side motion that they're really, they're keyed in on as an injured bait fish, kind of like fluttering up across the surface and moving back and forth across the surface. It's very similar action. This one's in green mac. I love it in white and yellow, or yellow over white, I guess. That's a great color. Green mackerel is a great color. You can do it in blue mac. And they're very, very good plugs for catching large fish all season long. A lot of people throw them in the spring. It's a great spring plug. It's a great fall plug, but it pretty much produces when the bass are being finicky, so finicky that even a pencil popper is not going to work. That's when it's a great time to throw this plug. I've had multiple low to high 40-inch bass hit in just the most spectacular way on this plug, which when they're going after a pencil popper, sometimes they'll suck it down, but when they're going after a Magnum Walker, they just explode on it every time. It's incredible. It's the same thing with the Danny plug. I mean, it seems to be like when it's a slower, when the plug's worked slower in the water, the bass seem to hit it that much harder. So it's an incredible plug, and this is like one of my favorite plugs that Pumbaa plugs make, because it's just such a good big fish producing plug, and it's incredible for the times of the year where it's slow. All right, so moving on. As far as so on your windier days, I personally believe in fishing, pretty much exclusively fishing topwater, as much as I can during the day, because I think that generally, and this is very generally, but generally, when you're fishing on the surface of the water, number one, it's awesome to see a fish hit on the surface of the water, but I think it actually increases your chances of pulling larger bass. Whether you're using a small popper or a very large one, I think it increases your chances of hooking into a big fish. And yes, you can catch a 14-inch bass in a giant Magnum Walker or a Danny plug, but you can also catch a 40-pound bass on that. So, two plugs that are fantastic for both the spring and the fall. There are two pencil poppers that I've done incredibly well all week this week on, and that is...
What's the date, just for those who are...
so it's November 2nd.
Yeah.
So this is the Tinker. So the Tinker is a great plug because it absolutely casts like a missile. And it mimics those more slender profile baits. So it gets this name from a tinker mackerel. So it's about the size of a tinker mackerel, and it is super easy to work across the surface. It's not actually that heavy of a plug, but man, you can cast this. And I mean, I'm casting it with 50-pound braid, and I'm getting like 75 to 100 yards, no problem on a 9-foot rod with this plug. And it definitely cuts through the wind. I mean, I've been fishing the past couple of nor'easters that we had, and honestly, there's been plugs that I've thrown and they've just gotten caught in the wind, flown up over my head pretty much. But this plug absolutely cuts through the wind beautifully, and it shreds the surface of the water, and it mimics those peanut bunker or small mackerel that are around very, very well. And I've done incredible. Like I've got in the past week, I've probably got over 50 fish on this plug alone, because it's just been producing just the masses of fish. Now, again, like for fall and spring, you may think about pinching your barbs. I don't have my barbs pinched on this plug right now, but for fall and spring, it's, food for thought, I guess, right? Pinch your barbs. Makes it a little bit easier on you and the fish. So that's a great plug. And then this one is the Big Eye. So this is a little bit bigger and it's a little bit heavier, which means this thing casts a little bit further and moves water a little bit better. So I found that if they're feeding on mackerel or bunker that are like either adult bunker or like medium-sized bunker to adult mackerel or medium-sized mackerel, this plug will get those bass that are bigger out of a school. So if I'm throwing at a big school of blitzing fish, instead of catching a bunch of tiny bass, this plug seems to pull those larger bass out of there because it has that a little bit bigger profile, but it's not too big that it's gonna overpower like what bait you're trying to mimic. So if you're trying to mimic a peanut bunker, this plug will be able to mimic that peanut bunker, but it will also be able to pull a bigger bass out of a school. This is an incredible casting plug, especially when it's super windy. You can get this easily 100 yards if you use a bigger stick. You can really launch this thing. It's incredible. I mean, it does numbers at the canal when their bass are blitzing in the middle of the canal. This is an incredible plug for that. It's super easy to work. You pretty much don't even have to do anything except reel it, and just with a little wiggle on the top of your rod, this thing will start dancing like crazy on the surface. It is a great plug for all year long. I mean, this is an incredible plug for the summertime, incredible plug for, both shoulder seasons. It seems to pull a lot of fish on this plug, especially during the summertime when there's a lot of bigger bass around. It is a big enough profile that a lot of those bigger bass will key in on it and try to really hit it, and it definitely shreds up the surface of the water and almost annoys bass into hitting it. I mean, I've seen big fish go airborne on this just to knock it out of the air because it's just incredible. When you get this working really well on the surface, I mean, it shreds. It like throws and spits water up everywhere. It's a great plug. All right, so that's a incredible pencil. It's a really good pencil popper. And a lot of the plugs that I do throw are primarily Pumbaa plugs because I've been doing so well on them in general. Now we're going to get into larger pencils. So I do a lot of damage with this. So this plug is a little bit bigger one. It's the Mac Daddy. So and hence the name. It has the profile of a big mackerel. So what it has is a flat bottom to it. And when you are fishing this, it has a cupped mouth, a very interesting mouth shape to it. And it is so crazy when it cups the water, it almost throws the water to either side, making this extremely large commotion. It's a decently heavy plug, so you're able to cast very far, but it sits very well on the surface of the water, which makes it really easy to work on the surface and entice those bigger bites, especially the bigger fish. And even if the bass are being super finicky and there's not a lot of them, this plug will call them in because it makes such a commotion on the surface, and you can work it super slowly because it sits so well on the surface that you can really call in a bass from far away, especially if nobody's doing anything in the canal and it's being quiet. This plug sometimes is what you need to throw out more water than any other person's doing there and have it sit beautifully on the surface. It's an incredible plug. And I throw this a lot in the the dog days of summer when it's super hard to get bigger bass. This plug seems to pull those bigger bass, and I'll fish this anywhere, anytime. I try to fish pencils around the again in the morning and evening, but even during the dead of the day, like 12 o'clock, and the sun's beating down and it's super clear water and the bass are just not biting, sometimes you'll even be able to pull some really large fish on this plug because it makes such a big commotion on the surface of the water. Okay, one more pencil, and I do primarily use pencils, and I'll get into how I work pencils and why they are so good at what they do. So I have one more pencil that I use very heavily, and this thing is very unique. So this is the Pumbaa pencil, and the Pumbaa pencil is a little bit heavier than everything else, so it absolutely casts like a missile, and it has a little bit bigger of a profile, so it is great for fishing for any type of like bigger, larger bait. This thing has your bases covered, and it absolutely casts like a missile. You can get this 100 yards, no problem with any, like the 9-foot rod, you can easily get this 100 yards, and it absolutely slices through the wind, like no problem slices through the wind. I was fishing in Nor'easter the other day, and none of the other plugs were working. I could get the Pumbaa pencil, or I could get the Big Eye out there. It was the only other plug that was able to get to the strike zone, but the bass were pretty big and they wanted a big profile bait, so I was able to get this actually out there to where those bass were sitting, and this thing absolutely shredded the surface of the water and really got the bites that nothing else would. And I was pulling so many fish only specifically on this plug. I was throwing diving plugs and everything else, and this was the only plug that was actually really pulling any fish. And so that's why I would throw up Pumbaa pencils if I'm in heavy current. And this is everything that would be in my bag on a daily basis. I have all those plugs in my bag, no matter if I'm fishing at night or during the day. This is what is in my bag. Colors vary depending on the time of year. I like to throw yellow plugs or yellow over white plugs more in the fall. And mackerel pretty much works all year round, but I mean, I guess both of them do, but I throw mackerel a lot when there's a lot of mackerel around, which I tend to see more in the summertime. There's a lot of mackerel around. Okay, now we're going to go into like more of a swimmer plug that I throw, or two swimming plugs that I throw during the day as well as at night. So this is the wobbler in mackerel. It's incredible the amount of detail that goes into the painting on this plug. It's like the exact replica of a mackerel patterns on the outside of this. We can also do this plug in a bunker, and it's again the same pattern that you'd have, and this has a very tight wobbling side to side motion, but you can also jerk the rod and get it to kind of glide and swim side to side, and I'd use this the same way I would use an SP minnow. It has very similar action. It's a little bit bigger, and it has a very similar profile to a mackerel. So if there is mackerel around, at all, and the bass are keyed in and are feeding on mackerel, this is my go-to plug. No matter if it's daytime or night, I'll throw this in both day or night, and it just seems to pull bass. Even when they're not biting, this thing I can generally get some fish on. It has a very tight wobble, but you can glide it side to side, as I was saying, and it seems to really get those finicky fish hitting, and I've gotten a lot of really nice bass on the wobbler in general. So the wobbler's another swimming. So that's my first real good swimming plug, and I reach for this in my bag a lot during the day when I can't get them on a pencil or a Magnum Walker. I'm trying to I'll switch over to this because it dives a little bit deeper and has that super tight wobble, but I fish it like an SP minnow. You know, it has that same action and that same like just ability to pull fish. So then the other one that I use a lot during the day, and probably more by surprise of people, is the Shad stick, because it swims. So it's interesting. This swims very well in the water in general, just in a straight retrieve. But I also like to jerk it really hard, and it jerks down deep into the water, and it wobbles on the way up. And generally, sometimes even at night, you do these strong sweeps of the rod, and it does this super long motion, and it kind of kicks and flutters with the tail, and then it will pause and start fluttering up, and on that pause, the bass will smash it. And I've gotten so many large fish on this season, especially in bunker. It's extraordinary how many big fish this plug has pulled. And I fish it during the day the same way I fish it at night with those long jerks. Or if the bass are being more finicky, I'll swim it perfectly, really slowly through the water with no rod jigging or anything, and it has this nice like little wobble and like side to side motion, and it kind of has a kick with the tail, and it looks like a bunker that's slowly swimming through the water, and the bass can't handle it. You can also bend the eye of the plug to get it up or down depending on where you're fishing. It can dive pretty deep into the water, and if you're fishing a big drop off, which is a lot what I do, is I fish these off these cliffs that drop off really deep into the water. Sometimes this can get down that 10-15 feet that you need it to, and pull those big bass that are tight to the bottom. It's pretty crazy, the bass that this plug has gotten this season. This plug alone has pulled some of my biggest bass of the season on this, and I've had some of my best nights using this plug when there's just a bunch of like medium size. I think it works a lot like a darter. If you're going to throw a darter in the current, this thing works the same type of way, except with a darter you have to do a straight retrieve. You can actually jig this and get it to really swim and jerk away from the bass, and sometimes when you're fishing with a darter or something, you're not able to get that hit because the bass think that it's like swimming away from them, and the bait's going to get away. This thing you can jerk and it looks like the bait is swimming away and it's getting away, and sometimes that will get that hit if there's fish that are following it and not really hitting it. Sometimes you can jig it really quick, get it to jerk and make some erratic motion, and the bass, and then pause it and let it wobble, and the bass will slam it because they believe that the bait is getting away. This is a great plug for nighttime as well as during the day, and it works. I work it the same way, and I've pulled some really good fish on it. Okay. And then the other one, which is more of a night plug. So now we're going to get to a little bit more nighttime. But you can throw this during the day, and I would throw this in the canal and stuff like that. Is the Fatty Glider. And the Fatty Glider has this beautiful, like shape to it that is super hard to get. Really, you look for a lot of plugs like this. Is a great plug. It has that shape of a bunker, which you could reel straight through the water with no action, and the bass would still hit this. It looks so much like a bunker. It's incredible. All you got to do is put a little jerk or a little twitch, and this thing will rock it side to side and make this super nice gliding, wobbling action in the water, especially in current, and it will just entice those big fish to hit. I fish this mostly at night, although if they're blitzing or they're feeding heavily on bunker, there's nothing better than this, because it just really will hit the bass. And these are everything that's my go-to plugs. If I'm fishing anytime, I feel I can go out anywhere, and I feel like all my bases are covered because I can fish pretty much anywhere and do anything with these plugs and get those big fish to hit them. And it has that subtle ability to be able to switch in between these plugs that are so realistic looking, as well as swim very well. And the current is why I truly believe in these plugs, because they have time and time again given me the chance to hook into some incredible fish. And it's really well painted so that it looks extremely like a bunker.
And that's not what color is that underneath?
So this has a purple to white belly, and it has more of a real bunker color to the top. I think that this subtle, little bit darker tinge to the belly of the plug, this purpley tinge, is extremely good at night. When they're kind of keyed in on silhouettes and color doesn't work as well, it shows that there's a difference between the belly color and then the actual color of the plug, going from light to dark, or from lighter to darker on the top. It's more of a black to gray color on the top. It looks so much like a actual bunker, and it really, especially this season, a lot of the big bunker schools at night would get pushed into the rocks, and this was one of those plugs that, I mean, we had incredible nights on only this plug because they really wanted that profile, and you could throw that out there and even let it sit on the surface of the water, floating there in the current. A lot of the times, even we one time cast it out into the water, and the plug was sitting on the surface of the water because we were talking back and forth about something, and the plug got hit and eaten on the surface, and it wasn't even moving, it was just floating on the surface of the water with the waves, and the bass smashed it because they thought it was an injured baitfish. So that just shows you how realistic it looks to them, that even though they weren't blitzing, and it wasn't one of those nights where it's fish every cast, the plug landed on the surface, made a little bit of a commotion, and attracted the fish to even hit it without any action implied on this plug. So that's what I have as far as my go-to plugs in my bag. Now, if we're going to talk about, what's in my in the front of my bag, it's a different story. Story entirely. You're not going to be able to hear anything.
Apologize.
Yeah. So, I don't only fish plugs. I do fish tins and stuff, especially in the fall, and especially during nor'easters. This diamond jig did a number for me during those, when it was blowing 60 miles an hour and nothing else could get out there. I was throwing diamond jigs, and I was getting small fish, but I was getting fish. So I was getting eaten, but I was doing well. You throw this in the rocks or on the sandy beach. Most people throw it on a sandy beach, but I would not be afraid to throw this in the rocks. I like to throw it out there, let it sink into these huge waves and wind, and then start retrieving it right across the bottom like a bucktail. I like to lift or jig my rod up a little bit, giving it a little flutter action, then let it sink down, and then keep retrieving it every once in a while. It just gives the impression of an injured baitfish, and you can catch really big fish on it, but you generally catch smaller bass on it. So that's a plug that I throw a lot when it's super windy and wavy out. It's a great plug to throw, especially when it's really windy out and you can't get anything else out there. And if there's sand eels around and the bass are not eating anything else, it's a go-to. The diamond jig is a go-to. And I'll fish that during the day and at night. Both times it'll work. And then, of course, the trusty bucktail.
Trusty and rusty.
Yeah, literally. So you can see this thing's, had some putting in work. I fish this in the spring, and I fish it all year long. I mean, people say, I only fish bucktails in the fall. I mean, that's such a myth. You can fish them anytime, and they work any time of the year. I like to fish them more when it's super wavy out. I don't fish them a lot, but when I do fish them, I've had some great days where I've gotten 80 fish in an hour on this, just casting at my feet and having it be every cast because the bass are in the wash and they're feeding on little bait fish. And it has that ability to get down into the strike zone and sit there, and for whatever reason it pretty much matches the hatch of everything, and the bass seem to crunch it. I put an ottertail jig strip on the back of it, and it just gives that a little extra action. Sometimes I'll trim it up to be smaller or larger depending on like how windy it is. Sometimes I like to be smaller when it's super windy. Sometimes I like to be longer when it's not as windy and I'm trying to get a bigger bass on it. But if you're just trying to get numbers of fish, bucktails are great. Especially in the fall, you can pinch the barb and you can really just, get in bass almost every cast without like no problem. When they're really blitzing too, it's a great plug to throw. It's sometimes better than a soft plastic because you can go through a lot of soft plastics. If you learn how to fish this, you can fish it a lot and it covers a lot of your bases, especially when the bass are being finicky. It's a great plug to throw, I think, all year long. If it's wavy and windy, that's kind of its just go-to time when you can't really fish anything else because it's in the white water and getting pushed around too much, not being able to work. This plug just sits there and just has that beautiful little swimming action with the tail, and it gets crunched. You feel that tick, and then boom, you're on. So bucktails are great. I have them all different weights too. I guess I could throw the diamond jig back in my bag. So the other thing that I have in my bag, I have different tails to my jig strips. I like the straight flat ones in white, and then I'll have red ones, and then I'll have ones that are have a little curliness to them. So there's different, they're like white and they have a little curl to them, so they kind of have a different little swimming action. Red gives the illusion of it being smaller, so if it's red it kind of seems like a smaller bait fish, where if it's white it seems to be a little bit bigger. The jig strips work and you can catch anything. Pretty much you can catch most fish on a bucktail, or I wouldn't say most fish, but you can catch a lot of fish on a bucktail. You can catch flounder on them, you can catch bass on them, and they seem to catch very large fish. I just use the smiling bills, or the smiling face to the bucktail. It's a great plug, and I use it a lot when it's windy and rainy out. Okay, so here's another one, which is which is an interesting one. This is an epoxy minnow, and I throw the epoxy minnow for a lot of different fish. I mean, you can catch bonito and false albacore on it. You can even catch bass on it. A lot of the times when the bass are super finicky and the water's super clear, you can throw this and you can jig it really quick and let it drop down flutter. It also mimics a sand eel really well. They come in different sizes. Sometimes you can fish them larger, and you can, if there's like a bigger sand eel around, and they come in different colors. I generally like to have one in my bag if there's bonito or false albacore around. I'll pick this up and throw it. It mimics that smaller bait, and it's a good plug. Yeah, and then I have, as far as soft plastics go, so this is like an algag. This is just a smaller soft plastic. I fish this in like estuaries, and when the bass are being pretty finicky and it's really windy, or if I'm fishing super deep, I like to cast this out and let it sink down to the bottom and jig it up. A lot of guys fish it at the canal. I don't really fish it at the canal a lot, but I do fish it a lot in really deep water. If I'm fishing off of a cliff that's 30 feet down, I can drop this down 30 feet and jig it up and let it flutter down. Sometimes that's what the bass want. And then as far as like smaller soft plastics go, this is just like a Zoom. This is like a freshwater soft plastic. The bass are being super finicky and they're feeding on peanut bunker or something, and you want to catch them. This thing is, it just has that soft plastic action that is hard to beat, and that's great. And I think it's on a VMC like jig head, like 1/2 ounce jig head. And then the other soft plastic that I use a bit is the Tsunami swim shads. It's like a paddle tail. I don't know if this is a Tsunami swim shad, but I use that lure. This might just be an off-brand of that. And it has a big paddle tail. It has a little weight to it. It gets down, especially in the fall. This is a great plug as well in the spring, I guess. I don't fish soft plastics really at all, really when I do fish them, it's because I have to fish them, and the bass are being finicky. But they do catch big fish. If you throw them in where there are big fish, it has that. A lot of times, like this will mimic a bunker, and it looks so realistic they will hit it. I'm like knocking things over. This is a bag where I had a rig deal in. Should probably throw this away.
Probably should throw that away.
Yeah, so it's like a plastic bag that I would keep a rig deal in. I do have, so I carry a snagging hook with me. So I in my opinion, is if you need to snag live bait to catch a fish, a big fish especially, do it, because I think there's no wrong way to fish, and I think I fish every way, and I feel like, I mean, if I can catch a giant fish on a live bunker, I'm gonna snag it and catch a giant fish on a live bunker. Mm-hmm. That's what I believe. And then we just get into bigger and bigger and bigger stuff. So it's another swim shad. And that's just, like, a chunk taken out of it. All the stuff in the bottom I didn't know about. A big bucktail.
Wow.
This is a 4-ounce bucktail. And you're probably like, why do you have a 4-ounce bucktail in your bag? Because sometimes the waves are absolutely enormous and you need to get something in the wave. I was fishing and the waves were so big that they're crashing on the way. They're ginormous. Like, I couldn't even be anywhere near where I wanted to be, and I cast them out into this wave and I would reel it in really quickly, and I was catching giant fish on this bucktail because it was in that strike zone where nothing else could be. Another great reason to throw a big bucktail. And then you'll probably laugh at me. I mean, this is stuff that I just have in there just because there was one day, I don't even know what the name of this is, but it's another just giant soft plastic, super heavy with a giant hook on it. And the only reason I'm carrying around, and this is probably 4 ounces too, and yeah, you throw this at the canal or whatnot, but the only reason I was carrying this around is because I was trying to get it in that strike zone that day, and I was just grabbed the heaviest jig heads I had and threw them in my bag. So that's why they're at the bottom of my bag, but that's why I kind of like what I throw. Regardless, this is what's in my bag, because you never know when you get out there and it's different.
Gotta match the conditions.
Exactly, and you need to be able to, match the hatch or match the conditions and be able to catch big fish. It was good to at least clean up my bag a little bit from all these craziness. But yeah, it just shows you that, like, being able to match the conditions that you're fishing, being able to throw the right plugs that you want to throw, and being able to get into the current and the on the surface when the bass are blitzing, and you need to be able to match the hatch or match what the bass are feeding on, or this is a pretty big bag and I have a lot of lures in here, but to be hopefully able to narrow down kind of what you want in your bag. If I had to pick 3 lures that you were to carry in your bag, I would pick either the Big Eye pencil or the Magnum Walker, because I think those are incredible plugs. So that's one, either of those. Then I would pick, I really love the Shad stick. I think with that plug alone, you could catch you could fish anywhere and catch pretty much everything you want, as far as size-wise, because it matches bunker so well that if the bass are giant and they're feeding on bunker, which I feel like they do a lot, and I feel like a lot of the bigger bass feed on bunker, especially where I fish, that you want that big profile bait, and it has that action that's hard to beat. I'd pick that, and then honestly, like a small 1/2 ounce bucktail, or 1/2 ounce bucktail, or an 1 ounce to 2 ounce bucktail, I guess, not 1/2 ounce, but an 1 ounce to 2 ounce bucktail, with just a white flat jig strip on it those are like my top 3 plugs that I feel like you could pretty much do anything with, because they really, I feel like that's what I would fish generally if I was to fish, the bottom of the water column all the way up to the top, and I need to pick, and first things I was gonna pick for either of those conditions, I mean, that's what I would pick. Or if I was to drag bottom, I could even use the Shad stick, that really can get down there in the bottom and you can really work it well, and it definitely pulls big fish. So that is a good quality deep dive into my surf bag, and into every single plug that I use and why I use it. I did say I was going to go over I want to go and do a segment with someone that is huge. We're going to hopefully get people onto the podcast. And I was going to go over how I use a pencil, but I want to get somebody on that uses topwater pretty much exclusively. That will tell you better than I can why pencil poppers are key to success, or really topwater in general, but pencil poppers, I guess I can go a little bit into that, and as far as how I use them for now, and if I get somebody else on that is, does more of it than I do, then that's pretty crazy if they could do, because
and we'll do that briefly and then hit some questions.
Yes.
And then wrap it up.
So briefly what I do is you fish a pencil popper with a slow retrieve. So I'm going to go on the rod here. So
for those who are watching.
Yeah, so what I would say is it's better to have a slower retrieve reel. So in the last podcast we talked about reels that we use, and
real talk.
Yeah. And in that podcast I talked about fast retrieves over slower retrieves, and why. And I didn't really go into why they're good, even though I probably should have. But for one reason why a slow retrieve is good, is for fishing a plug that you need to reel slowly on the surface, like a pencil popper. So with a pencil popper, what you want to do is you want to hold the rod. Generally, I hold the rod a little bit above the grip on the rod handle. So that I can work the tip of the rod at a pretty, like the same rhythm. So what I do is I pump the rod up and down, probably about, depending on how big the plug is, if you can get it to dance across the surface. So I guess however far you need it to go before you get the plug really dancing across the surface. And really you can do that with your wrist for a lot of the plugs. And maybe you need, for a much bigger plug, like the Mac Daddy, maybe you have to do a little bit more arm action to get the plug working a little bit more. But generally, all you need to do is just really move your wrist up and down, getting the top of your rod to move in a rhythmic up and down action. And a pretty slow retrieve, I'd say. You kind of pop it and you do one revolution to maybe 5 up and downs with the rod. And that should get the plug to pretty much stay in place and really dance across the surface. And then the number one biggest thing about pencil popping is when a fish is blowing up on your popper, it is very hard to stay composed enough to not hook set when you see it happening. So something that like fly guys say is like, you want to fish with your hands. And I guess this goes for any fishing, but you want to fish with your hands. So when you're stripping into it with a fly and you see a bass hitting it, you don't want to like hook set until you see until you feel the fish. The same way you do it with a pencil, you want to make sure you're on your retrieve when the bass is blowing up on your plug. Generally, even the action that you're giving to the top of your rod is going to hook set into the fish, but you don't want to hook set until you feel the fish bend your rod over. And even then, keep it going just for fraction of a second longer until it's really bent over, and then you can reel into it a little bit and then give it some good hook sets to really make sure the hooks are set into its mouth. It's especially hard to do when you're fishing and you have a giant fish swirling and boiling on your plug and then hitting it a couple of times. We're all there when it happens and you hook set prematurely and you pull it away from the fish and it doesn't hit it. And then a lot of the times when the bass are going after and hitting your plug, they'll actually hit the plug up and out of the water. And what they do, and you'll see this a lot of the time, is the fish will come up and they'll slap the plug with their tail trying to stun the bait. So then they can hit it. They'll also hit the plug up into the air. I've had bass hit it 6 feet in the air. Depending on how big they are, they can really launch your plug into the air when they hit it. And then when it lands in the water, I just like to twitch it a little bit and not really move it. Like if I just use what's there to just twitch it forwards like a couple times back and forth, the bass generally will come back and smash it. most of the time that's what happens. And we'll go more in depth with exactly
techniques
of if the bass are being finicky in regards to pencil popping, because there's people that can explain it much better than I can and have different tips than I do to getting a bass to eat it when it's not doing. So, just trying to set my rod back down.
You want to open up those questions that you got?
Handing my phone. So, so just swipe to the right. So,
all right, we got
first question.
First question: where can I buy Pumbaa plugs?
I guess that works pretty well.
That works pretty well.
Two things.
I'll pull it up again.
Yeah. So, two ways you can buy Pumbaa plugs is you can obviously just search it up on. Is it www.pumbaplugs.com?
Yeah, pumbaplugs.com. POOMBAHPLUGS for those who can't see the website on the screen.
Yes. And so you can do that, or you can go to my Instagram and I have them. They're the first thing I at them, and they're the first thing that I at on all my posts. You hit the at button, and it will bring you to their profile. And in the top bio of their profile, there'll be a link to the website, and you can click on that, and you should be able to navigate that
pretty easily.
How you will.
All right, and back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah.
Question: should we give shout-outs?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Shout-outs.
Okay. Michael McGuire 98 asks, what size jig heads do you use? When you use that, and what's the best color to use? And he prefers white.
Okay, so I also prefer white. I think there's many different colors you can use. I have, as in this 4-ounce bucktail here, is a chartreuse green with a white belly. I like white. I prefer white. I think chartreuse works. I don't fish black bucktails because I don't like to. But honestly, just a regular white bucktail is great. And I like to use, as I said before, I like to use between 1 to 2 ounces. I feel like for the surf, that kind of covers your whole bases. Obviously, I do go up to 4 ounces, but I only do that in extreme scenarios where it's 20-foot waves and it's blowing 60 miles an hour, and you're really trying to get the bucktail out into the water. The only problem about that is if you're fishing rocks, you're going to get the bucktail stuck into a rock, which is always not fun. So I like white bucktails. As far as if you're talking about soft plastics, I like white, and that's all I'll fish for soft plastics. And again, I will either fish them weightless, but if I'm doing a jig head for that, I am going to fish between 1 to 4 ounces. I think that's pretty a good weight, and that kind of covers your whole spectrum of fishing jigs.
Yeah.
And I got into them earlier this podcast, so you'll be able to, yeah.
The next question from Grabbing Bass: a million ways for a riggy, but what's your go-to methods for rig deals?
What he's referring to is, I said in the first podcast, getting hooked. I said there's a million ways to rig an eel, but or I've thought of a million ways to rig an eel, but what's my favorite way to rig an eel? And so for this question, there's going to be a podcast that is specifically on eels and rig deals and how I fish them. As well as I'm in the process of making a video of how I fish live eels, and I will probably make a video about how I fish rig deals. There's no better plug or lure or live bait or dead bait, whatever you want to call it, for catching giant fish than a rig deal. I will, in that podcast, show you how I rig an eel, which is kind of I do it the way a lot of people do. I generally try to do 2 hooks, although there's 2 methods that I like and think work well. So I will show you both methods to how I rig eels in a podcast coming soon.
Okay. This one's from Jamarad22. says, let's talk about new age fishing etiquette in a world surrounded by technology. We sort of touched on this, but I feel like there's not really time to do it justice in just a brief question. But you want to do an elevator pitch on
I guess
just quick stuff, or we could just say we'll talk about it on another podcast, whatever you want to do.
I don't know how much. What are we doing for time?
We're at 59 minutes.
Okay, so we have a little bit. We'll do a little bit. So because we need one more anyway.
Yeah.
So as far as this goes, I did touch on this a little bit before. My thought in technology is, number one, never chase reports, because that's just not smart to do. Out of the amount of times that it actually pays off, it's very, like, you see on Instagram the pictures of everybody with a 40-pound bass at the canal, but it is so, people drive so far to get to the canal with very little payoff. I live pretty close to it, like maybe a 2-hour drive away from it, and I've fished it a handful of times, and I've only caught one fish there in my entire life. So it's like, it's one of those things that's like, I wouldn't go and chase reports that are saying, oh, there's giant fish here, because generally people are smart enough that they don't post it as it's going on. I feel like a lot of the time it's posted a week or two later, which is what a lot of people do. And as far as like I would say, like the people that get all bent out of shape about like if you look at a fish sideways type thing, if like you're handling a fish even partially incorrectly, people, freak out about it. And in some regards, it's good to educate people on how to handle fish or how to or why you shouldn't be keeping giant fish. But at the same time, it can make people very angry, which you see a lot on Instagram, and it's kind of pretty unhealthy for a lot of people that, like, if you think about it, somebody that maybe is not that hasn't been doing a lot of fishing, and they catch a giant fish, and they're not super educated in, catching a giant fish, and you think that, and they post that picture of the fish, and they're like, wow, I caught a giant fish, and they killed the fish to show off to whoever, and that's their legal right because of the limit and whatever. And they post it on Instagram to show their friends and whatnot. But to then go on and like target that person, I think is wrong, because you don't know like what that person's coming from, or what that person.
You don't know the context.
Exactly. It's kind of what I'm trying to say. So it's not always good to really like target those people that are killing giant fish. Although if you do see posts of somebody with 4 giant fish, or like a fish under the limit, or saying something like calling them out on that, or at least educating them on the fact that that's not right to do, to take a bunch of fish, or to take fish under the limit, is one thing. But as far as like educating someone respectfully and how they're mishandling fish, I think is okay. But to, again, be like positive and not be like negatively attacking the person for handling a fish wrong, is a good practice to uphold. So that's kind of my little spiel about that.
This question by Hunt, Fish, Shoot, Repeat. I'd like to know more about the equipment you use, line, brand, clothing, etc. Well, that's sort of what the podcast is about, so we're covering that piece by piece.
Mm-hmm. As far as line goes, I could do a whole thing. I did a little bit about my gear.
I would just say keep listening to the podcast, because you're going to get more than enough information about that kind of stuff, if you're really interested in that stuff.
Yes, and I'm going to go in deep dives about exactly what clothing I do wear as far as waders and jacket, and as far as line goes, we cover that in a podcast that I think came out, right?
Yeah.
So we
Real Talk is coming out soon. Weekly update, maybe we mentioned it, but regardless, it's gonna come.
So we talked a lot about that, as far as like what line I use,
Real Talk will be out by the time this podcast is out.
Okay, so you would have hear in that podcast exactly what line and stuff that I use. And then as far as jacket and clothing and whatnot that I wear, we will make a thing about that pretty soon.
Yes. Last one. by Andrew Scardina. How much does the wind affect the fishing?
I think it is. So I think it's pretty much number one as far as like for me. And again, it's a big confidence thing. Two, I think it's a little bit of a confidence thing because I do think current might affect it more. But I do think that if you're fishing, wind is interesting because different winds affect different places differently. As far as like fishing off the rocks, I don't care where you are. I think a wind that's blowing straight into your face is the best. Now, if you're fishing on a sandy beach and there's current ripping from left to right, then you want the wind blowing from left to right because you want the current to be increased by the wind instead of like canceled out by the wind.
Yeah. And we obviously can go into more detail later about like specific winds, specific conditions, whatnot.
Yes. But that's like a little bit about that. As far as like wind goes, I like to have the wind blowing straight into my face when I'm fishing off the rocks because that's what I do most of is fish off the rocks because it blows bait fish in and it makes the waves bigger, which I think creates more current and disturbs the bait fish a little bit more, making the easier prey for the fish. So I think it really affects it kind of the most, in my opinion. If you can get a strong wind blowing in, I really like different winds in different spots. But if I have a strong wind blowing straight in my favorite spot, I know that I can pull a giant fish out of there. Like that's like the key number one thing. The tide doesn't matter as much as the wind, in my personal opinion.
Okay, there you go. Well, I think that's about it for what's in your plug bag.
Yeah.
Hope you're enjoying these podcasts as we keep letting them out. We're gonna keep cranking them.
Keep cranking them out. We're trying different lengths of ones. We have a shorter. Well, we're starting to kind of call it the weekly update, and then we're gonna have one that is longer.
A week, yeah.
Yeah, that's like we get that once a week. So you'll have 2 podcasts a week roughly. Hopefully, just depending on our schedules and timing of everything.
Yeah, but that's the goal.
But that's the goal because we've heard that you guys want more podcasts.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to do.
Yep.
So thanks for listening, and catch us next time.
See ya.